All right, so today we are going to be talking about Mary Shelley's sci-fi classic, Frankenstein. That was an awkward pause. I don't know why I paused like that.
It's a
One of the
good
most
pause.
thank you. One of the most influential stories of all time, and one that I think many people only think of the movie in terms of the story, which has a very different story, in my opinion. But I will specify this time. Rid, what did you think of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? And have you read it before?
No, this was my first time reading it, and I'm really glad I read it. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I thought it was really like dramatic, and I just loved Mary Shelley's writing. She has this very like it's kind of over the top and really wordy at times, but I really enjoyed it. And the story itself was very fascinating. It was like it was more philosophical than I thought it would be. So yeah,
Yeah,
this was great.
I agree that her prose have aged like outstandingly. I really like
Mhm.
hesitate to get in from literature this time because a lot of times you're like, this is not wonderful. But yeah, I guess Jake, you can tell me what you thought too or whatever.
No, I'm good.
Okay, that's fine. So
Hold on. Just be silent the whole video. Yeah, I agree with the pros. I think it has aged really well, and also the fact that it's from this like has like so many frame narratives in a way really helps because we're really hearing the story from this romantic poet who's now an explorer, who's writing these letters, and it's just like, dude, like who are you? You're like not a real human. You're just like, I'm a poet and I'm gonna go explore the North Pole. But we're really just hearing the story filtered through him, then filtered through Frankenstein, and then when we get to the monster, filtered through Frankenstein and him. And so I think that kind of like dramatic stuff, like for a while it was hard for me to get into because I'm like, this is a lot. It's very, it's very melodramatic, but I really appreciated it. And when things start to go haywire, and I think just Mary Shelley writes horror in just these scenes that are just, I think they're still really creepy.
Mhm.
yeah, so the horror actually held up to you, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, it didn't. That's actually one of the things I
Yeah.
had, aside from the tone, which came across really, really well. I never really found myself actually going like, "Oh my god!" Like it was just, I maybe because the story's been told so much to me that I wasn't surprised in any way. But it was definitely it worked narratively, but in terms of like actually the emotional evocation from me, I was a little disappointed in that sense.
Mm.
Mhm.
Were you actually afraid at any points, Rid? Were you trembling or afraid to sleep at night?
I didn't get scared, and I think it's because like the monster itself is not scary. And I don't think he's supposed to be. Like, and I don't know if it's like bad writing or if it was on purpose that the monster is not scary because I feel like he's actually quite sympathetic to
Mhm.
throughout the whole thing. And like something that I heard of before I read Frankenstein is this idea that like Victor is the actual monster instead of like the actual monster. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like I kind of already had gone into it with like sympathy for the monster, and I think the way that it's written and set up, like Victor immediately is like just repulsed by the monster, and there's no like reason for him to be repulsed by him other than like the fact that he's like supposed to be really ugly and kind of like scary looking, but as a reader that wasn't scary to me. Like that didn't scare me.
Yeah, I largely agree. For me, the horror was more from like people, right? Like the horror of this book comes from like our reaction to the other and like the way we'll treat a monster because it looks like a monster. But Frankenstein in this book, if you read this, then watch like the 1937 movie, it's an entirely different monster. Frankenstein is reinvented for that, which I found to be a
Mhm.
real disservice because it undercuts the themes of this book, which are large. Well, they're still there in the movie, but they're reframed in a way because Frankenstein in this book is completely intelligent. He's not some mindless brute. He has agency and thoughts.
Yeah, he teaches himself to read. Like he's smart.
He's definitely not dyslexic. I'll say that. Jake, what were your impressions of the monster versus like what you expected the monster to be in this read through?
Well, fun fact, I played the monster in my high school theater production
Oh,
of Frankenstein.
That's adorable.
It is
we
adorable,
have to
but
see
I was like,
pictures
oh
Can
my
I
if
have
you
God.
them
have
and put them
any.
on screen? I'm gonna have them on screen right now if Jake has the bravery to send them to me.
I don't think I have any, honestly. But they like did a good job with the makeup. I looked like really gross, you know. But anyways, that yeah, so I have like a real affection for the monster, and I feel like there's like a lot of unintentional comedy, like you said. Like I think the writing in terms of describing the horror and just this impending doom that's coming to Victor is really well done. But like you guys were saying, like that scene where he first creates the monster, it's so funny to me because he's just like, oh my God, it's so horrifying. What does he do? Like he doesn't do anything. He's just laying there. What does he do? He doesn't lock it away or anything. He just goes
Yeah,
to
I
another
know.
room. He just goes outside into
Yeah.
another room. And he's just like, oh, this is not a
He
good day
literally
for me.
tries to go to sleep. Like the
He's
first
like-
thing he does is he tries to take a nap, which is like so ridiculous. Like he doesn't have like any reaction to it. He like tries to take a nap. I think he like can't fall asleep, and then he just leaves his apartment and he walks around. Like it's so ridiculous.
I can't
Yeah, and
remember.
then the
does he
next
ever
day
s-
he's just like wandering around town. He's just like, oh my God, like he has a bad hangover or something.
No, like,
I can't remember. Does he actually restrain the monster at that point in any way, or does he just leave it?
I don't think so.
no.
I
That's
can't-
how the
maybe-
monster he just escapes from the house. Like okay, so he like is walking around the city and then he runs into his old friend,
Yeah.
like for no reason. Like his old friend just shows up like by coincidence, and then he's like, oh man, we can't go back to my apartment because Frankenstein or like the monster is there. And then he goes back to his apartment, and then like luckily the monster has just left and he's like super happy about it. And he's like, oh,
He's trying to
left.
ghost the monster.
I know. In his own apartment.
So there's flaws that have shown up with time, and there's a couple narrative decisions that make the main doc. I can't remember. I just watched the movie too. In the movie, he's not actually a doctor. Is he actually a doctor in the book or no?
He's a
No,
student,
so
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I've,
So in
I've, I've seen people say that he's like a medical student, but he's not. He's like a chemistry student.
And in the movie, they make the choice to change it so that he's a failed doctor. He wanted to be, but then he failed out, which is why he's like the mad scientist he is. My question for the book that I want to kind of do a big tone change here. There's a lot of narrative changes that really change the story from this and the movie everyone thinks about. But the emotional ending of this book is dark. Like it is a very sad ending. And like you may laugh at some unintentional comedy, but at the end, I kind of found myself like uncomfortable with the ending a little bit because it heavily implies, at least in my interpretation, that this monster is going to go end his own life. Is it directly stated? I don't think so. No.
I think he
No.
just says he's gonna go wander and just, but it's like it's the North Pole. Like I don't know.
Yeah, he's gonna die.
Yeah.
And there's this change in the movie where the ending of the movie is like, yay, the monster's dead. Isn't that wonderful? And I just found that to be an example of like Hollywood censorship at the time. But actually living up to the legacy of this book, because of its ending and many other of the choices in the story, was very controversial, and it actually had some pushback due to some of the nature of the relationships. And that's why there's actually two versions of the book. There's the 1818 and one that came out roughly 20 years later, where Mary Shelley changed the story in some substantial ways. Do you know which version you all read?
I read the 1831 version. You told me you were reading the 1818 version. So
I believe that's right. And Riddhima, do you know which one you read?
Yeah, so I read the audiobook and I believe it was the 1818 version narrated by Dan Stevens.
Dan Stevens. Oh, was the narration pretty good?
Yeah, it was really good. I think that's part
Oh.
of the reason why I enjoyed this book so much.
See, was it like one of those like gravitas performances, or was it more?
Mhm.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
great. Those are
And
so
he-
addicting.
Yeah, he does this like, so you know how there's like the Captain Walton, I think his name is, and then like the shift from Frankenstein, and it almost gave me chills because his voice for Walton is so like nice and pleasant, and then his voice for Frankenstein is this like evil, like really deep gravelly tone, and it was really good.
That's actually, so that hits on something that's going to be one of my biggest problems with so many popular culture imaginings of Frankenstein. And that's that, like, he doesn't even speak in the movie. And so it just completely diverts from what the source material is implying, in my opinion, about intelligence, how we judge others. Because, like, if you look into Mary Shelley's own life, there's a lot of dark stuff there. And I think she had a very negative view of how people treat others. Whereas the popular conception of Frankenstein now is like, in the movie, he just murders a little girl and he is responsible for a lot of harm. And he's just this not intelligent brute, which I think really changes the interpretation of people's reaction to him, where he is literally a monster in a way. He's not really sure what he's doing, and they're definitely attacking him a bit. So it's a little gray, but I found the book to be much more morally complex in terms of the reflection of how humans react to anything that is alien or new.
Yeah,
Jake, you haven't talked in a minute, so please do now.
It's so different. I mean, I wish I had seen the movie recently too. I saw the Robert De Niro one a while ago, which was not good.
Wait, does Robert De Niro play the monster?
Yeah, Kenneth Branagh directs. Yeah,
I just imagine him being like, "Hey, I'm the monster. Okay, let's go.
It's
move on."
basically that. Like, it's literally, he's just like, I'm the monster. But yeah, to me, like, the perfect adaptation of this book is Young Frankenstein. Like, I feel like, in a way, it captures more of those themes, like, in a silly way. That's just me.
Well, that's the
Have you
Mel
seen
Brooks
it?
one, right?
Yeah. Gene Wilder.
I'm so confused of whether or not you're being serious right now.
No, I'm being dead serious. Like, I think, I mean, have either of you seen it?
Yeah. Oh, years and years and years ago. Did you see? No. Okay.
No.
I mean, it's, in a way, a bit like the monster learns to speak and stuff like that. And it's like, it just really plays on some of the themes that Mary Shelley actually deals with, and, which is different from the 1930s movie, I think.
Oh, that's fascinating. I haven't watched it as an adult, so it looks like I need to go back and do so. And I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of comments from people saying Jake's so right, or they're gonna be like, Jake's an idiot, and we shall see. We shall see.
And I'm happy with either one,
Just up the engagement.
It's all engagement.
Yeah, it's all engagement. Yeah.
But one of the most interesting aspects to this book to me is just how boundary pushing it was for the time it came out in, because Mary Shelley had to hide the fact that she was a woman putting it out when she released it, which already implications left and right. And then it treated humanity in such a new, dark way that, at least in my opinion, I hadn't seen so directly. And then simultaneously, it spawned sci-fi in a sense, where if you look at people like Asimov, they quote Mary Shelley as like their major influence for how they then evolved the genre from there. And I don't know, I just want to talk about that, because it's just, I keep looking into the details of this book's release and going, Mary Shelley had balls the size of Manhattan for putting this out like she did.
I was reading the Wikipedia for this just so I could sound smart during this discussion, and apparently she like wrote it like it was like a competition, and between her and her husband, who was just like one of the most famous poets of all time, and then like a bunch of other people who are also super famous. And like, I think that's so cool that she wrote it like as part of a competition. I didn't know that.
That's amazing to me, because no one in the comments is going to be able to think of her husband without Googling it, and everyone knows who Mary Shelley is.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like Percy Shelley's pretty. Would you say Mary Shelley or Percy Shelley's more famous? Probably Mary Shelley.
Mary Shelley, yeah. I think people don't really read poetry anymore, but like Frankenstein is kind of like a pop culture icon. Yeah.
He's been dropped in like bars left and right. He's been in The Simpsons. He's been spoofed and riffed on by Mel Brooks. I mean, and possibly interpreted as many times as freaking Sherlock Holmes. I don't think it's exaggerating to say that Frankenstein's monster is maybe the most iconic individual monster in the history of fiction. I am hard pressed to think of anything aside from Dracula that comes close.
But yeah, that's the thing, though, that's weird about revisiting these classics, like probably Dracula too. I haven't read that in a while, but like Frankenstein, it is so dark. Like at the core of it, like what it's trying to say, it's super cynical. And like it came out at a time where like Romanticism and like Percy Shelley, like one of the most important romantic poets and all this stuff, it's just like so against the literature of its time, and it was so ahead of its time. Like I I can't think of anything like from this era that is so cynical and so like, oh, all this like romantic, like nature is on your side and like there's a meaning to all of it. It's just like, no, like you're insignificant. Like there are things that you can't do. Like there is knowledge you don't want to have, you know, that's terrifying. And that's so, it feels very modern, you know, and I feel like reading this, it reminded me a lot of like reading Moby Dick, because it feels like there's a lot of similar themes, because it's like this like existential stuff going on. But I know this came out first, I think.
I would say it borders on, in terms of the themes and view of people, it reminded me of some of Poe's stuff, or, you know, just the
Yeah.
darkest stuff from that era of like, we're horrible, our minds are terrible, the world is awful, like, don't be happy. And this is how we would treat something that is new, because we don't understand it, we're flawed. And I think if you look into Mary Shelley's life, it makes sense to me, at least, of why she would have felt this way. And it felt very raw in a sense. I think this was a very true to the author, at least in how it felt in the reading experience, book to me. I lost track of my sentence in the middle of it there, but you get my point.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I thought of like after finishing this book was like how Victor had like such a good childhood. Like there was nothing wrong with his life, and yet he had every reason to like treat the monster with kindness and, you know, just be compassionate towards it, but he didn't. And literally at every turn the monster was treated like, if just one person had been kind to the monster, like the blind man, like he was kind to the monster and the monster responded with kindness in return. And like that was the only time that he was shown humanity. And yeah, it's just, you're right, like it's such a like pessimistic view on humans, like the way that we just like immediately reject, you know, whatever is different. And I mean, earlier I criticized the, you know, the way that Victor responds to the monster when he creates it, like, but I feel like what would we do, like if we were in that situation where we were confronted by something that seems so like unnatural and horrible, like would we really be better than Victor? Like would we really show the monster kindness? I don't know. And I think maybe that was intentional on Mary Shelley's part, that the immediate reaction was this disgust and just like rejection.
So I want to ask a very basic question that I think could be taken in different ways in terms of how you're going to answer it. But would you see humanity treating a monster like this better now, or no, we are as brutish as we were back then? And this kind of, I think, pretty honest take on what humanity's treatment of Frankenstein would be would change. Are we morally better than we used to be, I guess is what I'm asking.
I don't think we are necessarily, but I do think that we have like a different understanding of like what, like how what human beings need in order to like function and be, you know, mentally sound and not go on a killing spree like the monster. Like, I mean, like what it seems like to me, it's like there's this romantic ideal of like you're this solitary human who just doesn't need society. Society's a drag, you know, go be in nature, be part of nature and be connected to God and whatever, all that stuff. And then it's like, well, the monster is solitary, he's out in nature, like, and he needs society, like, and that kind of shows you like the monster is tearing society away from Frankenstein, all of his social connections, and he becomes the monster in the end. You know, that's what the monster's trying to do to him, I guess. And it just, you know, society, man, society.
We live in one.
We live. I don't know if you know this. We live in a society.
What about you, Red? Do you think we are better or worse, even possibly? I don't know. How do you view? Basically, how do you view people now?
I don't know. Like, I want to be more optimistic. I think like society as a whole is impossible to make generalizations about it. But I will say that like newer generations, like Gen Z, I do see like, I know like Gen Z gets dunked on a lot for, you know, stuff like just like SJW stuff, I guess you could call it. But I see that as like younger people trying to be better. and trying to, just try to like see different points of view and treat people who are generally treated badly and treat them with more kindness and compassion. So I would like to think that, future generations, maybe they would be able to see Frankenstein and see his humanity and look past his like ugly exterior, and like see him for what he is.
Well, I found this book to be is a great point, and I think this book is kind of inherently a very one-sided view of nature versus nurture, if that makes sense. Where Frankenstein seems to be a reflection of pretty much what happens to him. I didn't find there to be a lot of nature to him, or yes, nature to him. Instead, there was just a lot of nurture, which is fair because, like, right, we didn't know the complex sociology back then or psychology words, but we yet it's maybe that's unfair to apply to the story in the first place at all because he's not a human, or is he? I don't know. I'm losing myself as I'm talking. How's your day going?
You're fine.
Well, no, I think you're right. I mean, it is very like one-sided, nurture versus nature, because I don't think, if it was written now, like it'd be totally different, and like the Victor would be like obviously the monster. And it's interesting that in these two versions, in like the 1818 version, it's less, from what I've read about, I didn't read both versions, from what I read, it's less critical of Frankenstein, and that in the 1831 version the publishers were kind of like, maybe you need to be more certain that what he's doing is wrong and like point that out, and like what he, so I think that she put in more like obvious criticisms of what he was doing, because I do think even in that short amount of time, like the opinions were changing about this stuff.
Yeah. And Mary Shelley is someone who I would be fascinated to hear what she has to say about the interpretations of her work. Because as Rid brought up here, it was kind of just like a part of a competition, and maybe it had been marinating in her head for years, maybe not, we don't know. And that's such an interesting part of the legacy of Frankenstein to me, the not known for something that's been so impactful of how this story came to be and what the reaction actually felt like when it came out.
It's funny you brought up Joker earlier, because now that I'm thinking about it, Joker is like kind of like a Frankenstein adaptation in a lot of ways. Like Joker,
how do you mean?
is
That's
kind of
that's
like,
interesting.
well, not really, but like just in the fact that like Joker is kind of like an outsider to society, and like or like the monster is like an outsider to society, and they both like lash out.
Yeah, that's actually a very fair.
There's
like
probably
parallel.
more parallels than that. This is video essay content. This is
Yeah, you should make that. Feel free to steal that, anyone. You can make a joke. Is Joker Frankenstein
a
video
modern
essay.
day Frankenstein.
And I've been harsh on the movie. I do think it's a really good movie, the one that influenced everyone's perception of Frankenstein. And one area of the movie that I think they inadvertently stayed very true to the book is causing controversy, because there's actually a censor in the movie. For anyone who's unaware, in the movie, there's the iconic scene where he goes, "It is alive," that everyone knows, and it's parodied and parodied and parodied. But then he immediately says afterward, "I know what it feels to be a god," or something along those lines, which of course the South, especially at the time, said, no, you can't have that kind of language in a movie. So it then brings in this religion conversation to Frankenstein that I really expected to be in the book more, and it's not. There's actually kind of this absence of religion, which is strange to me, because it seems like a story that in the time especially, religion would have played a heavy part of the conversation in.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because Mary Shelley wasn't religious. I'm not sure.
That's fair.
Could be.
I think there is an absence of religion, but instead of religion, there's so many scenes in the book where it's just like Victor going for a hike, or like he just like goes for a camping trip with Henry Clerval, and I kind of saw that as like, I don't know, like maybe Shelley was kind of trying to juxtapose like the beauty of the natural world, and then sort of juxtapose that with like the depravity of what Victor had done by like creating this life. Because I mean, it almost was like a little too much description of like the beautiful like Swiss Alps and whatnot. But I do think it was like on purpose, that it was like kind of meant to highlight how wrong this was, like how awful it was that he had created this life. and
No,
it like went against like the natural laws or something.
yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to encapsulate that, and it's a good observation. I don't know. I was shocked by the absence of religion, and I can't be the only one. I literally have in my notes here Henry Clavill slash Henry Cavill, and then I just pictured Henry Cavill for the entire book. I couldn't not picture him, so it was Dr. Frankenstein with Superman walking next to him.
I think he's described as like being really attractive, like Henry Cavill. So, I mean,
I'm not saying Henry Cavill is named after him, but I'm not saying he's not. And in maybe the most infuriating, inexplicable Hollywood decision I've ever seen, the 1937 movie changes the name of the doctor to be not Victor, and then introduces another character named Victor, who's just not in the book. And so they remove Victor, name him Henry, and then they bring in another Victor, which I don't even know what the beginning of that thought process is like. I have absolutely no idea, or why they changed his name to begin with. But who in that writer's room was like, Victor, nah, bring in this other name, but let's keep Victor though for someone else. Like, what? Why? It's so confusing.
Such a good name too. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Can't waste it.
I don't think the book is necessarily horror. After reading it, I guess I went in expecting it to be really horror, but it's just not. I found there not to be anything overtly scary. The only disturbing things are some, action in the page, but also just the observations about people. So I guess I'd call it more of a dramatic thriller sci-fi story than anything else.
Mhm.
It's certainly not in the same tone as Alien.
Yeah, I think thriller is definitely a good description for it.
Though I do want to see Alien versus Frankenstein now.
Oh my God. That's exactly what I thought.
Not directed by Ridley Scott. That's a whole other video essay in itself. But let's go ahead and wrap this on up, though. I'm going to ask you to do what is largely considered the impossible, and that is rank a classic on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you label Frankenstein in a gun to your head review?
Shoot me. Literally, I just posted my Dune. I posted my Dune review today with Nadia, and in the video, she literally said, well, okay, 1 to 10, Dune, I'll point a gun to your head. You have to come up with literally exactly what you said. Like, what is this with guns and having to rate things? Why is this so, like, what's with all of this violence? Good Lord.
Do you seriously refuse to rate it?
That's 10 out of 10. I mean, it's a classic. I don't know. How do you rate it? I don't know.
I'm going to go with a 10 out of 10 too. Because it's like, it started a genre. Like, it's so iconic. You kind of have to give it a 10 out of 10.
Let's hear it, Daniel.
I'm going to push back. I'm not going to just fillet the classics as you have insisted on doing. Instead, I will say, yes, in terms of the critics and the influence, yeah, it's a 10 out of 10. But my own personal enjoyment, 7. Soft 7. Because it didn't make me feel much. The whole book, except for the end.
You have to listen to the audiobook.
All right. So now I don't have to wait for the comments. I'm getting from you guys. But no, I would say it's a 7 in terms of enjoyment. Critically, it's a 10. But in terms of my own enjoyment, no, I thought it was emotionally lacking. It was thought-provoking, which I'll give it a lot of credit for. That's why it's still a 7. But I didn't feel much until the ending.
That's fair. I mean, you weren't allowed to have emotions back then. You just got to suppress that, So
yeah,
I was hoping for a.
Can we just talk about how weird it was that he married his cousin? Like, no one thought that was weird. Like,
that is a difference. That is changed.
That's a difference in the 1831 version. They
really?
made her change that. Yeah, she was an orphan that the family had adopted.
In the 1818 version, they're not related, but they grew up together. And there's this whole weird, there's a whole weird monologue when she's introduced where Victor's like, it gave me great pleasure to know that I owned her. Like, he says that. And I'm just like, what? I was like, okay.
That's something about how Mary Shelley viewed men.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Honestly.
Yeah. And then when the mom dies, she's like, my dying wish is that you marry your sister. It's like, that's all she wants.
Well,
Yeah.
that is something that is censored for the later versions, but we as Frankenstein fans can rest assured that Mary Shelley would be pro House Lannister. Anyway, all right, I'll cut all that out. And
No incest for your video.
no, I just meant
Sorry,
up
I don't have a
into-
sick mind like you do.
All right, that's the ending of the video right there. That's the way it'll cut. Thank you guys so much for coming on and being a part of this conversation. If you want to check out their channels, they'll be linked below. Highly recommend you do. They're also really great on other social media platforms that I'll have somewhere or not. I'm lazy sometimes. And let us know what you thought of Frankenstein in the comments down below. We sincerely care and will read each and every single one.
Daniel will heart every comment and reply something very thoughtful.
That's not gonna happen.
I'll
All right,
do it.
thanks guys.
I can't heart it, but I'll do it.
You could just reply with a heart to every single one.
I won't do that.